I like to get into maybe a history lesson a little bit, and I think you're probably the best person in Texas to do it. Um, it the idea of the Gulf, being in an alternative investment, being in a position, whether it's geopolitically or just geographically, to be an alternative investment haven, so to speak.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because oil and gas has been the de facto standard, aside from real estate, for alternative investment for the better part of, well over 100 years.
Sure.
Can we talk about that a little bit in regards to how rich the history of Austin or of Texas is in the alternative investment space?
Yeah, certainly. So, so you can really kind of think about private equity from a history perspective. Modern private equity, if you think about it in traditional fund structures, leverage buyouts, things like that, that really started in New York. A lot of the major investment banks in the early 80s with, some of the mergers and acquisitions that took place during that time period. A lot of it was fueled on debt and it was levered. And, it was sort of the burgeoning of that asset class there. At the same time, on the West Coast, we had sort of the Silicon Valley explosion of venture capital there, kind of precipitated by some of the offshoots from Stanford, kind of made Silicon Valley what it is. So you have the bi-coastal framework here of sort of the private equity and hedge funds on the East Coast and the venture capital on the West Coast. Austin has been long known as a tech haven, right? So we had IBM here since the 70s, Texas Instruments here around the same time frame, and then Dell sort of blowing up our tech scene in the 90s, going into the early 2000s, really attracted a lot of tech talent to Austin. Around that time frame, Austin Ventures, if you remember that firm, they began investing in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, and really helped create a institutional investment culture. They were really one of our first larger institutional venture firms here in Austin. And, since they have since wound down their operations, we have a lot of offshoots. So we have a lot of, smaller venture firms here in town that, are creating a really vibrant and active startup community. That's been great. And, I think just based on, the quality of living here in Austin, there's been a lot of larger firms that have relocated a large portion of their operations here in Austin. So, we do have the institutional, investors are located here. But on the other side, there are hundreds of billions of dollars that are managed out of Austin on the institutional allocator side. So we have Texas, University of Texas endowments located here in Austin, Texas Teachers Retirement Systems, Texas Employee Retirement Systems. There's just a ton of capital that's here in Austin. And so that attracts a lot of top tier firms on the alternative investment side to come to Austin to raise assets. And, we benefited from that, being able to get access to a lot of these groups coming through town. And, it's a relationship driven business. So we try to cast a wide net and meet as many groups as possible. And, when appropriate, bring those types of investments to our clients.
Sure. Can you actually go a little more in depth? I don't want you to, be at risk of alienating any of your relationships, but I mean, you're a pretty well entrenched individual here in the space, and just talking about, the endowment funds that are there in Austin and some of the, large institutional investors that really find a home base there. Can you talk about how important relationship is in the alternative investment space? Because it's still, it's not burgeoning to institutional investors, but for the mainstream investor, it's just coming online now with, mainstream applicability, I guess, for lack of a better term. Can you talk a little bit about how important relationship is there in the area?
Yeah, for sure. So, whenever we're working with a group, so we have a very detailed and in-depth due diligence process that we go through whenever we make a new allocation to a manager. It's the same process that, I did when I was working with, $1 trillion consulting firm that we try to do here for our clients at Waterloo and for advisors like Strategic. But on the backside of that is really, the relationships that we have to cultivate and develop to be able to find and gain access to these managers. So, the types of managers that we gravitate to are the managers that are capital constrained and operating in markets where they don't need a lot of additional capital. That's our benefit as, being, a smaller than institutional investor, working with our client families we work with, is that we can allocate to strategies that, that are limited in the amount of capital that they can take in to implement a given strategy. So, some of a good example of it is, there's some, lending categories here in Texas that, might, source, $100 to $300 million in new loans per year. And the funds that invest in this space can only deploy a certain amount of capital. And so there's a limited amount of spots that are available for investors to access these strategies. And so we will go out and develop relationships with what we feel like are the best managers in a given space. They can get comfortable with our due diligence process, our ability to operate and administer investments in this space. And ideally, we're able to negotiate either for lower fees or lower minimums for our clients to be able to access these strategies that really just aren't available at any other sort of similar size institution. So that's really a competitive edge that we have in this space.
For sure. And how much of your time, maybe you don't want to go into this, but how much of your time is spent actually nurturing those relationships? I mean, you must be sitting on board seats. You must be at meetings consistently.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I just spoke at an alternative investment conference last month, and we kind of do those things because it's a great way for us to continue to build these relationships, and it's a continual process, right? We're always trying to network and meet what we feel like are the best managers in the space, or an up and coming manager that will be one of the best managers in their particular strategy. And so it's something that we do all day, every day. Really trying to stay abreast of what's happening in the alternative investment space, and make relationships with top tier teams.